Um, so the last exercise that we had seen, the relational analytics dashboard, was about networking in organizations, but it was a sort of an abstract case study. So people were coming together to discuss a hypothetical scenario and coming together to kind of reflect on what is the information we can gather from networks? How can that inform our thinking about the scenario? With this next exercise, we wanted to move further into the applied spectrum and to help people not just to think about networks and organizations, but to think about their own networks and directly what their current real world networks look like and how they can sort of leverage or improve those networks more. So that's what motivated the development of this exercise called the Personal Network Report, or the abbreviation for that is PNR for short. So PNR is an exercise that guides sort of learners through self-reflection, as well as empirical quantitative-based feedback on real networks. So this is an exercise in which participants are asked to picture a network context, and they're going to reflect on that, visualize the network, and sort of think about how to improve that network. So when I say real world network, that can mean a lot of different things, and that's going to depend on the context of for whom you're running this exercise, as well as sort of the context individual students want to or learners want to pick. So for instance, you might be running this exercise as part of a course with undergrads, in which case they may be able to picture like their job, an internship, or like their sort of networks within like the cohort of their major. Whereas for people in a professional program, or if you're running this at a company, people may be able to directly picture their sort of real world networks today of who do I work with on my team or in my department at a job, either a recent or a current job. And then how can I reflect on that or sort of leverage network thinking to have some key takeaways? Um, so that's the goal of this exercise, is to guide learners through this sort of self-reflection process. So that's big picture PNR, or the personal network report. We're going to provide a report that has feedback on your personal network. And real quick, this is an exercise that was developed with Jasmine and Neelam and Nashir, who are also in attendance today. Great team. So let me show you a little bit about what this personal network report I'm talking about looks like. And then I'll go through kind of some of the teaching materials and how we present the exercise in class. And all of this is linked in the slide deck, by the way, so you're able to get to it from there. So let's look at the sample personal network report. So it would be customized with details on a network you describe. In this case, it's just going to say sample person. And the report kind of benchmarks properties of your network versus the average properties of other reference groups. So in this case, this sample person is talking about their academic cohort at school, and they're going to be compared against the network properties of other people in their academic cohort, against the network properties of other people in the same class as them, assuming this exercise was part of like some sort of teaching course that is being run. And they're going to be benchmark their network against people who have the same gender identity. So that's the report. There's some introduction text. And then the first thing this report does is it kind of breaks down what does your network look like, and it helps you kind of visualize it for some different relationships. So there's network visualization for advice, trust relationships, and then friendship relationships in your network. Then it's going to walk you through 6 different sections that talk about different properties of your network. Each of these properties is called a signature. So there's 6 signatures, and they talk about abilities that your network gives you the capacity to do. So it's not saying that necessarily you're good at these things, but you're structurally positioned in your network in a way that gives you some advantages or weaknesses. And what are the capabilities that are enabled or constrained by your network? So for instance, in this case, it's looking at ideation. These signatures are taken from an article on Better People Analytics that I'll discuss a little bit more detail later. but it's looking at the ideation score. So you can see that the sample person score was the 46th percentile, so about average. And it's looking at that score relevant to other people who talk about academic cohorts, where the ideation score tends to be on average a little higher, and relative to other people in the same core system, where the average score on ideation tends to be a little lower. So that's sort of the plot, and you're getting feedback on for every signature, how's the signature defined? How do you score on it relevant to others? So noting, for instance, if you're in the top like 5% of people at the signature. And then we talk a little bit more about what having a high or low score means and how you can start to think about different strategies or approaches for improving these scores. So it's just taking network properties like we would kind of think of like Bert's constraint, and then putting them in a more accessible form and breaking it down so people can go through that sort of guided self-reflection process of thinking about their networks. So we go through 6 of those. We also have a similar reporting format for diversity score. So looking at properties like gender, race, or age diversity of your network. So am I being connected in my team to a relatively diverse group of people, or do I have a more homogeneous network? But using the same sort of reference groups to kind of report that. And then the final section of the personal network report is the social resources table. And it's a table that's kind of mapping out who are the people in your network and what different resources do you rely on them for. These resources being things like trust, someone you go to for advice, friendship, energy, so who's an energizer, and also who provides you with a sense of purpose. And by plotting out your relationships with all these people, you can start to look at time multiplexity, as well as which resources are more or less available. So in this case, the sample person has a lot of people that they go to for advice, but there's only one person in their network that they said was sort of an energizer, and only one person in the network who they said provided a sense of purpose. So then the other thing in this table is a personal reliance score. And that's how reliant are you on that one person for providing resources that other people don't other people don't provide. So in this case, they have a very high reliance score on Jen, because Jen's the only person in the network that they sort of described as an energizer, someone who like gives them enthusiasm or energy when they interact. So like their sense of energy is really reliant on Jen. And also that's important to think about, because if Jen sort of leaves the network, or if they lose their connection with Jen, then they don't have another person who's providing that sense of energy. So that's sort of plotting out like how sensitive you are to sort of turnover on that one person, and also to help you reflect on, hey, am I relying on this one person for too many things? And should I maybe sort of spread out that reliance amongst different people in my network? So those are kind of the overall sections of the report. That was just like to upfront show you what it looks like. And now I can kind of talk you through the teaching materials and how we normally sort of present and run this exercise with participants. Yeah, so the personal network report, the goal is to help people develop their networks for success. And we run this as an exercise. So we describe it that it's kind of like a personality quiz, but rather than focusing on attributes of the individual, what's my personality, it's focusing on attributes of the network. Where am I situated in my context and organization? What are my relationships like and the relationships like around me? And what do those enable or constrain? So it's sort of this network version of a personality quiz. This exercise builds on and was inspired by this Harvard Business School article, Harvard Business Review article that Paul Leonardi authored with Nashir. And essentially part of the article was how do we think about networks in organizations, and trying to make those kinds of like network thinking, network insights more accessible to people. And that's where they kind of coined this concept of structural signatures. So like properties of networks that kind of say what the network enables or what the network constrains. So these are kind of 6 of the signatures that we present in the report. Was there a question? Okay, sorry. Yeah, so these 6 signatures capture kind of different network properties. So in lecture, we would discuss these more, but in the interest of time, I'm just gonna move through it quickly. But we present these 6 signatures, and they're the same 6 that we go through in the report. So the way the exercise works is people provide in sort of a questionnaire form. They describe their network, and then they get back personalized feedback in these documents, answering the question, how should I build new connections? And how can I better leverage existing connections? Those are the things we want to guide them through this process of reflecting on. So the process kind of plays out in sort of 5 steps. So we ask people to pick a context. So that's their academic cohort, that's their past internship, that's their current job. They identify key people in that context. They describe their own network connections. And then they describe like sort of their contacts, network connections. So they're providing their perception of who they're connected to, as well as who their connections are connected to. And then lastly, they add some more details about different members of their network. So adding information like demographics that we use to calculate diversity scores. So interestingly enough, when we were running this in courses and with different participants, one of the things that kind of surprised us is that the process of going through kind of this questionnaire and just mapping out your network is something participants found to be like really useful or insightful, even before they received the report. And kind of the insight behind that is that everyone, when they think about like organizations or a job, they kind of have the heuristic or like the basic knowledge, like, oh, networking is important. It's good to network and build connections. But a lot of times people actually don't like take time in their day-to-day or like explicitly like block out a time in their schedule where they say, I'm going to reflect on my team, who's connected to who, what we can do differently, and how I can like better sort of go about networking and build my network. People don't always do that, and they don't always spend enough time doing that and like explicitly taking time to like map out their network. So participants sometimes have a lot of like insights or ideas just from like filling out the questionnaire and describing their network before we even get to sending them the report. Just taking time to do that and helping them like go through the process once is like really helpful to participants. So that was kind of the first like takeaway we had from teaching this with students and teaching this with organizations. So they've sat down, they've kind of filled out the questionnaire. What comes next? And what we do is we're going to send them we're going to provide them with 2 different guides. So the first is the personal network report. So that's what I kind of demoed the sample of. So it's a customized guide to their network. And basically it's comparing their network to the kind of average scores of different groups from all the people who have completed the questionnaire in the past. And that's something that we have automated. So they're able to get that report within 5 to 10 minutes, and it's just sent over email right away. So like their data isn't shared with the instructor. It isn't, there's no delay while other responses are gathered from their classmates. They're able to fill out the questionnaire and get some feedback like right away that they can look through the report, reflect on their network, and hopefully build off of that. Of course, there's kind of a question when you're running this in a class, or if you're running this with an organization and you're doing like a company like workshop, let's say, is a big question is how do I compare to my peers in the class or my peers in the organization if we're running it with multiple people in the organization? And that's where the second report comes in, the 360-degree network report. In that case, it's going to be very similar to the first network report, but it's going to add in the results on how their score compares to the average scores of their peers. So essentially, if it's a class of 30, it's how does my network score compared to the average score of all 30 people in the class. So again, we're just sharing averages. So it's kind of protecting individual's privacy, and that you won't know who in your class is scoring high or low on something. You're just going to know like, oh, this is the average score and this is how my score compares. So the reason that's split into a second report is that for that, you have to wait until everyone has filled out the questionnaire. So sometimes that can take a while. And so we send the personal network report you get right away that's just based off of past responses. And then the comparative 360-degree network report, you can generate that right before the debrief session and share with all the students. So the process of running this is actually pretty simple. So we have it all in one quick admin form. So this is kind of the instructions you need. There's links to the introduction slides that you show before assigning the questionnaire. And there's a link to the debrief slides that you show afterwards. I'll go through those next. But essentially, then you just send out a link to the P&R questionnaire. Participants can go through this, they can fill it out. If it's part of a session, if it's part of a class or an org session, you come up with a session code to give them. But otherwise, they just fill it out and they'll get the report emailed right away. You don't really have to do anything else. You can just like share the link. That generates the first personal network report. And then for the 360-degree report, if you want to generate those, you just go to this admin form and you can say send comparative reports. You type in the session code that you used. You put the group name and then you just click submit and it will generate the 360-degree reports and it will send them to everyone. So the process of running it is pretty automated and it's very simple. The biggest burden on the instructor is just figuring out how do I want to present the slides and just managing or checking in on people when are all the responses complete so I can send out that 360-degree report. So that's the basic process. So essentially at this point in like the introduction, I would show the slide. I would give students the link to fill out the questionnaire. And I would say enter session code teach, or I could replace teach with any other like short code. That's just an identifier so that we on the server side, it knows who's in the same class so it can generate those 360-degree comparative network reports. So I will run a live demo here, but if you're interested in it, you can go to this link. If you click it, it will take you to the questionnaire. You can fill it out, and then you should automatically get your own personal network report in 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah, so that's the introduction slide deck. And the second slide deck you would present would be the debrief slide deck. So there's different ways you can run this as an exercise. So if you're teaching like a multiple week class, you could do that introduction at the end of a lecture, give students until like the next week's class to like fill out the personal network report questionnaire and look over the reports on their own time, and then do the debrief at the next lecture. It also works, and we've done this before, if you want to do it as like a one-off workshop or just in one class. What you can do is you can introduce the exercise, give students the link, so leave it at this slide, and then just give them like 15 minutes live in class. And they can like fill it out, they can get the reports, read it in class, and then you can do a class-wide debrief. So it works either as a spread out activity over time, or you can run it in a single session. We've also run it in hybrid or online courses, where the introduction and the debrief were like sort of a pre-taped recording, and then students sort of completed it on their own and did kind of a discussion assignment about their networks. So it's pretty flexible in the format, and it can really adapt to the needs of your course. So what does the debrief look like? So essentially in the debrief slides here, and they're also linked, it's going through kind of a recap of, it's like a personality test, except for looking at your social connections. So here's a sample network diagram for like fake data, just showing how to visualize a network. If you're teaching this as part of a network class, they may already know how to visualize the network. But if you're teaching this to maybe a one-off workshop or a wider audience, this is where you would kind of explain what a network visualization is, what it's showing. You would go through the different structural signatures, and kind of the key takeaway you want participants to have is to think about the weaknesses of your network, but also think about capitalizing on your strengths. With a report like this, it's easy, or some students may gravitate towards just focusing on like what their weaknesses are, but strengths are equally important. So you're thinking about like, what am I good at and how can I sort of capitalize on those abilities? So if I'm positioned to like connect different groups as kind of like a broker, I should think about how I can capitalize on that or help information sharing in my network context. So then you can kind of go through the signatures. This is demonstrating on how to interpret the results. So I would talk about, here's your score, here's the different reference groups, and thinking about what it means or how you improve upon it. Then we can talk a little bit about diversity. And there are benefits to having diverse teams or diverse perspectives. And of course, the caveat you have to put in is that this is kind of based only on some aspects of diversity, and other things like diversity and like technical expertise or background areas of education is information that the personal network report won't have. So a lot of it is like very context dependent on it's very also dependent on the quality of the information that participants provide. And then going through the social resources table, that part I also demoed earlier, but looking at these 5 key social resources, which resources are more or less available in your network, and how much you're really reliant or over-dependent on individual people in your network. In this case, as a recap, all the rows are different individuals. So right now it's just fake data where it's showing like sort of initials. So after we kind of go through the reports, you can run some like large group discussion, but we also have like sort of a breakout activity. So we have people work with a couple people nearby them, or if it's an online course, you might put them into breakout rooms in Zoom and give people a chance to like individually talk through with each other, like what do they want to change or leverage about their network, and kind of get feedback or like hear how others are thinking about what they heard in their reports. So you can do this breakout activity real quick, give people a chance to discuss, and then bring it back to the large group. This final slide has sort of the idea of like goal setting. So thinking about either in the long term or in the short term, if I have a specific goal, how do I translate that into action items? So kind of walking people through the process of, if I want to accomplish certain things, how can I translate that into like specific actions I want to take in my social network to help me build connections or to leverage my existing connections better? And that's sort of the format or kind of the takeaway we want people to have from the exercise is they've taken the time to think about their networks, map it out, see what it is, and hopefully formulate some of their own action items on this. And the breakout activity is part of that. So the 2 key links I'll have here is the sample report and the admin form. The admin form also has like all the information you need to run the exercise, including links to a set of introduction slide decks and a set of debrief slide decks. So that should be kind of all the steps you need in order to run the exercise. Yeah, thanks.